Picture the ground after the fighting stops. The smoke clears, the noise fades, and what's left is a landscape that will never be the same again. Not just churned earth and ruined towns, but a world that has quietly shifted onto a different path. Empires that existed in the morning no longer exist by nightfall. Languages, borders, religions, entire futures decided in the space of a few days by people standing in mud and fire. We like to think history moves slowly, that the world changes by inches. But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes everything pivots on a single battle, and the version of the world you live in today, the languages you speak, the countries on your map, the freedoms you have, traces directly back to who won and who lost on one specific patch of ground. These are 10 battles so massive they didn't just decide a war. They bent the entire course of human history. We're counting them down. Number 10. The Battle of Antietam, 1862. It was the single bloodiest day in American history. On the 17th of September, 1862, near a creek in Maryland, Union and Confederate armies collided, and by sundown, around 23,000 men were dead, wounded, or missing. More Americans fell in that one day than on any other in the nation's history, before or since. But the numbers aren't why it changed the world. Antietam stopped the Confederate advance into the North, and that gave Abraham Lincoln the moment he'd been waiting for. Days later, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation, transforming the war from a fight over Union into a fight over slavery itself. It also discouraged Britain and France from recognizing the Confederacy. One day by a creek redirected the future of the United States and helped ensure it would become a country without legal slavery. Number 9. The Battle of the Somme, 1916. On the first day alone, the British Army suffered around 57,000 casualties, the worst single day in its entire history. Men climbed out of trenches and walked into machine gun fire across open ground. By the time the battle ground to a halt months later, more than 1 million men on all sides had been killed or wounded for a few miles of shattered earth. The Somme didn't decide the First World War, but it changed something deeper. It shattered the old romantic idea of war as glory and honor. An entire generation learned that modern industrial warfare meant mass, anonymous, mechanized death. The trauma of the Somme echoed through the next century, in poetry, in politics, in a deep European reluctance to ever repeat it. It was the moment the world saw what its own machines could really do to human beings. Number 8. The Battle of Verdun, 1916. In the same year, on the same front, came a battle designed not to win ground, but to bleed a nation to death. The Germans deliberately chose Verdun, a fortress city the French would never abandon, with the explicit aim of drawing in and destroying the French army. The fighting lasted nearly 10 months, the longest battle of the First World War. By the end, the two sides had suffered a combined total approaching 750,000 casualties, often fighting over the same few hundred meters again and again. Verdun became a symbol of pure, grinding attrition, of war as an industrial meat grinder with no decisive victory, only exhaustion. It seared itself into French national identity so deeply that "they shall not pass" became a national vow. Verdun showed the world a terrifying new idea, that a war could be fought simply to consume human lives until one side ran out. Number 7. The Battle of Leipzig, 1813. Before the World Wars, there was the largest battle Europe had ever seen, and the biggest in the world until the 20th century. At Leipzig, sometimes called the Battle of the Nations, more than 500,000 soldiers from across the continent converged to face one man, Napoleon. For years, Napoleon had dominated Europe, redrawing its borders almost at will. But at Leipzig, in October 1813, a coalition of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden surrounded and crushed his army over 4 days of fighting. It was the beginning of the end for him. Within months, his empire collapsed, he was forced into exile, and the map of Europe was redrawn by the powers who beat him. Leipzig ended the age of Napoleon and reshaped the balance of the entire continent for the century that followed. Number 6. The Battle of Okinawa, 1945. In the spring of 1945, on a small island south of mainland Japan, one of the most savage battles of the Second World War unfolded. For nearly 3 months, American and Japanese forces fought across the island in fighting so intense that the civilian population was caught in the middle, with tens of thousands of Okinawan civilians dying alongside the soldiers. Okinawa mattered far beyond the island itself. Its sheer brutality, the kamikaze attacks, the fight to the last man resistance, the staggering casualties, convinced American leaders that invading the Japanese mainland would cost hundreds of thousands more lives. That calculation fed directly into the decision to use atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki instead. The horror of Okinawa helped usher in the nuclear age and the way the war finally ended, shaping the entire world that came after. Number 5. The Battle of the Dnieper, 1943. This is one of the largest military operations in human history, and most people in the West have never heard of it. Along the Dnieper River in 1943, as many as 4 million soldiers fought across a front hundreds of miles long, as the Soviet Union drove to push the German army back across Ukraine. The casualties were almost unimaginable, with estimates running into the millions across the whole campaign. The Soviets succeeded in forcing the Great River and recapturing Kiev, breaking the German hold on the region for good. The Battle of the Dnieper was part of the massive Eastern Shift that bled the German war machine dry. The scale of the killing on the Eastern Front, far larger than anything in the West, is a big part of why the Second World War reshaped the world the way it did. Number 4. The Battle of Kursk, 1943. In the summer of 1943 came the largest tank battle in history. At Kursk, the Germans launched a massive offensive to regain the initiative on the Eastern Front, and the Soviets were waiting for them with deep defensive lines and thousands of tanks of their own. Thousands of armored vehicles and aircraft clashed across the open steppe. Kursk was the moment the momentum of the Second World War in the East permanently changed hands. After Kursk, the German army on the Eastern Front was never able to launch a major strategic offensive again. From that point on, they were retreating. It was the death of German hopes in the East, and it guaranteed that the Soviet Union, not Germany, would be the dominant land power marching toward Berlin, a fact that would shape the entire Cold War world. Number 3. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942 to 1943. Often called the single most decisive battle of the Second World War, Stalingrad was a months-long nightmare of urban combat. The German army pushed into the city on the Volga, and the Soviets refused to let it fall, fighting house by house, room by room, and fighting so close that snipers and hand-to-hand combat decided the fate of single buildings. Then the Soviets sprang a massive encirclement, trapping an entire German army inside the ruined city through a brutal winter. When it finally surrendered, the loss was catastrophic for Germany. Hundreds of thousands of men killed or captured. Stalingrad shattered the myth of German invincibility and marked the true turning point of the war in Europe. After Stalingrad, the question was no longer whether Germany would lose, but when. The world we got afterward, divided between the Soviet and Western blocs, was forged in that frozen city. Number 2. The Battle of Cannae, 216 BC. Now we go back more than 2,000 years, to a battle still studied in military academies today as a masterpiece of tactics. In 216 BC, the Carthaginian general Hannibal faced a much larger Roman army at Cannae in southern Italy. And he did something extraordinary. He deliberately let his center fall back, drawing the Romans in, then enveloped them completely with his cavalry and flanks, surrounding the entire Roman army and annihilating it. Tens of thousands of Romans died in a single day in one of the most lopsided defeats in history. Yet here is the twist that changed the world. Rome refused to surrender. Instead of breaking, Rome rebuilt, adapted, and eventually destroyed Carthage entirely. Cannae proved Rome's terrifying resilience, and the empire that grew from that refusal to quit went on to shape Western law, language, and civilization for the next 2,000 years. Number 1. The Battle of Tenochtitlan, 1521. At number 1 is a battle that didn't just end an empire, it ended an entire world. Tenochtitlan was the magnificent capital of the Aztec Empire, a city of perhaps 250,000 people, built on a lake with causeways, canals, temples, and markets that astonished the Spanish when they first saw it. It was one of the largest cities on Earth. In 1521, the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés allied with tens of thousands of indigenous peoples who resented Aztec rule and aided devastatingly by the diseases the Europeans brought, laid siege to the city. After months of brutal fighting and starvation, Tenochtitlan fell. With it fell the Aztec Empire, and the entire balance of the planet shifted. The fall of Tenochtitlan opened the Americas to European conquest and colonization. It set in motion the collapse of countless indigenous civilizations, the transatlantic flow of silver, crops, and enslaved people, and the rise of a truly global, interconnected world. Few single battles have so completely changed the trajectory of the entire human species. So here is the thread that runs through all 10. We carry our maps, our languages, our nations, our freedoms around as if they were always inevitable. As if the world simply had to turn out this way. But it didn't. Behind almost every line on the map is a day of mud, fire, and unbearable choices, where it could just as easily have gone the other way. Every one of these battles was, for the people standing in it, just a terrifying present moment with an unknown outcome. They didn't know they were deciding the shape of centuries. They were only trying to survive the day. And yet the world you woke up in this morning, the country you live in, the language in your mouth, was handed to you by strangers who fought and died on ground you will never see. That's the strange weight of history. It isn't a smooth story of progress. It's a chain of moments that could have broken differently, and didn't. 10 battles, 10 hinges, and on the other side of every one of them, a different world that almost was.